Humans have always tried to unearth the story of our origins. And our understanding keeps evolving as new tools, new voices, and new evidence continues to test old assumptions. I'm Imran Garda, and this is the Doha Debates podcast.
I don't think there's an Atlantis of the gaps, but we're in the business of searching for things we don't know.
I have people that tell me that I help pull them out of the cult of fake archaeology.
We really help to change people's perspectives about the past in the Amazon.
Our government is trying to rewrite our history.
Our debate today is the timeline of human civilization as settled as we think. I'd like to welcome our guest to the program. Ed Barnhart is an archaeologist and director of the Maya Exploration Center. Welcome, Ed. Sarah Parcak is an Egyptologist and professor of anthropology at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Eduardo Neves is a professor of archaeology at the University of São Paulo in Brazil, who specializes in the pre-colonial Amazon. And Flint Dibble is a teacher in archaeology at Cardiff University who focuses on ancient Greece. Thank you all for being here. To begin with, Flint, is the timeline as settled as we think or we might have thought?
I mean, I think that depends on what you mean by the timeline, or what you mean by civilization even. I do think that there's been an enormous amount of archaeological survey and excavation, and it gives us a pretty decent sense of what happened with humans in deep history and deep prehistory. On the other hand, I think that the public oftentimes is not up to date on what current archaeology actually has to say about that. So, for example, very few people take archaeology at a university level, and so what they've learned as children, for example, that might not be what archaeologists actually think.
Is that the fault of culture, society, the zeitgeist, archaeologists themselves not explaining things properly?
I'd say all of the above. Yeah, I think archaeologists could do a better job explaining things publicly. Sometimes we're scholars, we shy away from the limelight. But at the same time, I think that there are definitely people that misrepresent us intentionally in the public sphere.
Yeah. We're going to get into some of them. Let me go to Eduardo. That timeline, is it as complete as we think? What's missing?
I think, roughly speaking, we have a very good idea of what happened in the ancient past. For instance, if I bring the discussion here to, but there's some changes that may happen, small like adjustments to the general narrative. If I think about, for instance, there's a very big discussion here about the timing of the settlement of the New World, when the first humans arrived here. And here in South America, for many years, people have been claiming that the settlement happened maybe before 20,000 years ago, or even before that. And that's a big discussion because there's an academic tradition that really established for a long time that there should not have been people here before 12,000 years ago. Some people are saying that, maybe some people are willing to accept that some of the dates for the early settlement go back maybe to 18,000 years, or even a little bit before that. So I think we may have some kind of a rough adjustment. But I mean, the point that I want to make here is that everybody agrees that the Americas was the last continent to be settled by our species. I mean, that's nobody disputes the notion that humankind, the cradle for humankind is in Africa, that our ancestors came from Africa and eventually they settled in Europe and Asia, and then they got here to the New World, to the Americas. We may dispute when the timing of their arrival happened here. But I think it is accepted by most people who do archaeology that, there's a basic notion about the deep human past. It starts in Africa, it radiates from Africa to Asia and Europe, and eventually reaches the Americas and other parts of the world.
Sarah Parcak, is the structure, the basic structure, solid?
I think generally speaking it is. I think about, human evolution and all the amazing discoveries that we seem to be making almost every week now. And in talking with with our colleagues about, early hominids and how they developed, this idea that there was one morning that one of our, 500th great-grandparents woke up and we were Homo sapiens. That's not true. I think now with seeing it's not a tree of human evolution, it's a series of dense bushes because new species keep being discovered. And we can't see it as a fixed point in time. It's a long, slow evolution. So sometime more than 300,000, 400,000 years ago, over hundreds of thousands of years, we slowly became Homo sapiens, and yet we have within us Denisovian DNA. We have Neanderthal DNA and other unknown species. All these amazing new discoveries keep being made that change the timeline, maybe pushing it back a few thousand years, maybe a little bit more. But generally speaking, it's pretty solid. Certainly within Egyptology, we know, roughly speaking, the general chronology of the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, the New Kingdom. But there are ranges. There are debates even within Egyptology. There's a high chronology, a middle chronology, and a low chronology. And new discoveries, new advances with dating technologies help us to refine what we already know.
I first want to sort of get everybody's basic idea out the way. Ed, is it as settled as we think, or is there, as Professor Dave said in his interview with you, is there an Atlantis of the gaps?
I don't think there's an Atlantis of the gaps, but I try to remember that we're in the business of searching for things we don't know. So, a part of me hopes that we're that wrong. It would be exciting to be the generation that did find something that none of us saw coming. And that has happened in the past. It'll hopefully happen in the future. But I do agree with my colleagues here that we have a pretty good picture of what's going on. At this point, it would be very unlikely to change the story by, tens of thousands of years. I think we're honing in on it nicely. And I think that we live in a weird world where people can pop off on the internet and say all sorts of things. And if they say it with a handsome smile, thousands of people will believe it.
Let me get this out the way before I open up the whole sort of Netflix thing and the what's happening on the internet. Sarah, when was the last ice age?
I cannot believe my brain is freezing.
12,000
younger, 12,000 to 11,000 years ago.
Okay, so according to a lot of information on the internet, during that particular time, what was lost was some sort of advanced civilization. Is there any evidence for that?
No, there's no evidence whatsoever for it anywhere in the world. I've walked over at this point in my career hundreds, if not, I don't want to say thousands of archaeological sites, but it's a lot of archaeological sites. One of the amazing things about the way that the deposition patterns work on multi-period archaeological sites, and when you're doing survey across broad landscapes, is that those landscapes tend to reflect in a really nice way the full range of occupation. Right, you'll find things on archaeological sites in Egypt that date to 5,000 years ago because of the way that the depositional patterns work. And to this day, all over the world, you think with the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of archaeological surveys that have been done, something would appear. Right? And what we know and what we can see in the archaeological record very clearly with our colleagues that do prehistoric or Paleolithic archaeology, there's beautiful sequences of occupations of archaeological sites going back many tens of thousands of years. And we don't see anything abruptly disappearing.
Okay, maybe let me ask Ed. When we mean advanced, we mean something more than hunter-gatherer, right? So we're assuming settled with great technology. Is there any evidence that some advanced society might have seeded later civilizations or taught later civilizations from that Ice Age era?
No. Next question. I'm kidding.
And that brings us to the end of the podcast. So, please continue, and I'll get the two of you to.
That's okay.
A lot of it is about how we define civilization, what's civilized, what's not. The hunter-gatherer way of life went on for thousands and thousands of years across the planet in different ways, using their local resources and their similar human brains. But there's nothing in the archaeological record that we find that says that there was something much more advanced than that nomadic way of life that was there and then lost.
Then why, Eduardo, is this such a big deal now? Is it just like, have we all just lost our minds because of the pandemic or something? Like, why is it an issue? Why is it being discussed so vociferously? And why is it being weighed as a kind of 50-50? Well, I mean, there's two sides to this. There's advanced beings probably, seeding future civilizations, or the conventional mainstream narrative. Why are we discussing this?
I think it goes beyond archaeology in many ways. I don't think that's an issue among archaeologists. Everybody here, we all practicing professional archaeologists. Well, we all agree with Ed and with Sarah. Maybe that's something, has to do with people's anxieties today about the ability of science to provide set answers to the questions that people have. But because some people, again, maybe archaeologists, they shy away to participate in the public debate, because people, they really like, trying to find answers to their anxieties. We live in a world of deep transformations. The fact that there were places in the world that we know today which are underwater today, and were like, open land, maybe like, 18,000 years ago, makes some people like suggest these like wild ideas that these places like were the myth of Atlantis, there were lost civilizations living there. But I don't really think there's a debate among archaeologists. I think no serious archaeologists really believe that there were like stuff like that, which is, underwater today during the last ice age. When I live in Brazil, there's people been talking about, it's funny how this happened. It was during the pandemic, and actually I had COVID. I didn't know. And I did an interview. It was like recorded on Zoom. And these fellows, they say, they're Brazilians. They said there was a city in the Amazon which was settled 450 million years ago. The city which was large, a city which was larger than the city where I live, São Paulo, which has 20 million people today. So they talk about 450 million ago.
Who was saying this? The podcaster.
Can I use like wackos or freaks or whatever? I know this is a polite setting here. These guys, they're not archaeologists, but they're making a lot of money because you have to subscribe to the channel. You have to pay some, and they go and they do expeditions to find archaeological sites. And the way they look at, they look at my own work. We've been mapping some interesting features in the Amazon earthworks that really seem to show that there were more people living in the Amazon in the past. But we're talking about like 2,000 years ago or 2,500 years ago. These fellows, they use this kind of information with pictures of historical fortress built by the Portuguese in the 18th century. They put them together. They say, listen, this is evidence of an advanced society living in the Amazon 450 million years ago. 450 years ago, there were not even dinosaurs on Earth. So they bring together.
The Amazon wasn't in the Amazon.
The Amazon,
yeah, exactly.
The Andes did not exist. But it's a very difficult task. We have to do this. We have to address this debate. My first reaction was, these guys are really crazy. Who really pays attention to that? But that's going back to what I was trying to say. There was an interview by the BBC Brazilian service. It was recorded in Portuguese. And a few weeks afterwards, 500,000 people have seen it. And they didn't see it because of my work or because of the archaeology that I do. They're really curious to know about this lost city in the Amazon, which was settled 15 million years ago. So I think people in the outside world, they want to know more about these things. And I think it's an open test for us archaeologists to join in, to engage in some kind of public debate. We're living in hard times, climatic change, wars everywhere, democracy is being eroded, everywhere in the world. So people, they really need to attach or to hold you to things that they can believe. And as a smiling guy comes, dress us with a vest, dress up as an archaeologist, as people imagine archaeologists should dress up, and talk about a lost city in the Amazon 450 million years ago. A lot of people are going to jump in and think this is really true.
Yeah, so I have a question for everybody here. So is Graham Hancock an archaeologist?
No.
He doesn't claim to be an archaeologist. But if you look up the bestsellers today on Amazon.com in the field of archaeology, what number do you think Graham Hancock's book is?
Number 1.
It's number 4 today.
Or number 4
But
today.
if you looked it up a week ago, it was number 1.
Yeah.
And so the reality is that this is making very big money. And Graham Hancock, of course, is one of the key people that claims there's a lost civilization from the Ice Age, this kind of advanced civilization. You brought up really well, Eduardo, that one of the claims is we don't know what's underwater because since the glacial maximum, the sea level has risen 400 feet. And so, but the reality is it's not risen 400 feet everywhere. And for example, there's areas with tectonic uplift where there's one tectonic plate going under another and the land is rising faster than the sea. And we can look in those areas and we can do survey and we don't see an advanced civilization. We see hunter-gatherers living there. But the reality is these people, they go on the internet, they write these books, they go on TV shows, and they try to say that we do not know anything about Ice Age coastlines.
Do you now regret going on Joe Rogan and engaging with Hancock, given everything that
Not at all.
happened
God,
afterwards?
No. I every single day I get messages from people on the internet telling me that I convinced them that real archaeology has its together. I've literally gotten that exact line. But every single day I have people that tell me that I helped pull them out of the cult of fake archaeology. And so there's obviously been a lot of vitriol since then. I have been framed as a liar by Joe Rogan, for example. But, that's Joe Rogan. I'm not interested in what Joe Rogan thinks. I'm interested in showing the general public what archaeologists do, how we come to the conclusions that we come to, and what we can say about the past, and just how fascinating our evidence is and how it provides this picture of humans and what our ancestors were doing thousands of years ago and how we can actually do that. And that's what matters to me. What matters to me is not what Graham Hancock thinks or what Joe Rogan thinks or what they say on Ancient Aliens. It's about trying to educate the public and show them the wonder of our human past.
Ed still finds some value in what Graham Hancock says and does. You're on the record as saying this. Tell me why.
Well, let me clarify if I misspoke in the past that I do not believe Graham's theories or his conclusions about things, but I am, on one level grateful that he and his and people like him have created this audience that's interested in what we're doing. I see this as a huge opportunity to share the wonder that we at this table share with the actual ancient past that we're seeking answers to. And so this is an opportunity for us to, they have somehow garnered an audience that have the romantic notion that our past is interesting. That's great. Our task is to somehow pull them into more legitimate information. And, I take a softer tack towards folks like Graham Hancock because I believe you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. And I also agree to be on those shows because they're having a conversation that millions of people are watching. If we think we can just shun that conversation and they'll think different, that's not the right tack. I put myself in there not to tell people that these guys are wrong and I'm right, but just to be there as, part of the conversation. Some of those people will see me and say, well, I'll Google that guy. What's he doing? And then they'll find all the things that me and my colleagues are doing. You don't change people's minds by telling them they're wrong. You
So Flint's the military wing and you're the diplomatic wing. You're the State Department wing.
Perhaps.
If you don't mind.
I respect
But
Flint's sword.
I want to make the point that I think there's many different approaches to engaging with the public. There isn't one right way to do this. I think that different people respond to different approaches. You mentioned Professor Dave's video, for example, about me. He's the militant wing. He will dunk on these people really, really harshly. But and some people say, wait, he's way too harsh. But I've even gotten comments, wow, I found you through Professor Dave, and I was in the cult of fake archaeology before I saw that. Some people need the stick. Other people need, an open hand, and different people respond differently to different ways that evidence is presented.
Sarah Parcak, when we look at some of the sites and claims that are used as examples for why perhaps archaeology, if it's not by design or if it's not by conspiracy, it's maybe archaeology as it stands is ignoring what seems to be, from their perspective, abundant evidence that there's much more to the story. So when they look at something like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, they go, or in Turkey, they say, well, look at the timeline. We didn't expect these people to have these elaborate ritualistic temples, these incredible statues of these anthropomorphic figures and all of that. All that ritual. Hunter-gatherers are not supposed to have had any of that. This means advanced civilization. Are they drawing the wrong conclusions? What is it about those specific sites that gives them oxygen and fuel, but also, from your perspective, what is it about those sites that means that actually, no, we're still within the realms of sort of mainstream archaeology?
Well, so first of all, kind of pulling back a bit, none of these folks are archaeologists, right? Graham and others. And so they don't understand that Göbekli Tepe just didn't emerge overnight out of nothing. It's a long, slow evolution. If you go back tens of thousands of years before it emerged as a site, you have to look at the evolution of culture. You have to look at the evolution of how we started working with stone, how we became artists, how we started working with natural materials. And you have to have a good understanding of how people and groups moved throughout the landscapes of Africa, throughout to into out of Africa, and as we started inhabiting the world, into Central Asia and elsewhere. So if you understand that long, slow evolution going back 120,000 years from when we left Africa, sites that you see in Turkey make sense. I think because they don't understand that there are other sites that came before it, that it was sort of a representation of the end process of things that had been already going on for hundreds of thousands of years. They use sites like that as an example that we emerged, out of nowhere, that there had to be some civilization, some, whether alien or Atlantis, that helped to seed these things. But really, it's representative of this great sort of a cultural melting pot, right? All these ideas, all these developments in technology. But the truth is, everything you're hearing today isn't new. All these same arguments, all of these same points that people are making were being made in the 1850s to 1870s. What was going on in the 1850s and 1870s that's similar to what's happening today? Well, early 1800s, you have the Industrial Revolution. People start moving from farms into cities to start working in factories. So the whole social fabric of society starts being torn. You have, of course, the announcement of evolution, and society is scared. People are pushing back against everything. They feel out of control. Well, what's happening today? You have post-pandemic, you have AI. People are looking for something to hold on to because they feel like they're not in control of their lives or the world.
What is it then about the narrative that clicks and smacks for people?
I think, for one, they don't understand real archaeology. So, for example, Göbekli Tepe is this spectacular site. The monuments there, the art there, it looks really good. And that's what matters. Because what people don't know is there's actually a bunch of sites from the same period that don't look as good, that show the same kind of technology. Sites with T-pillars that were discovered before Göbekli Tepe. Or, for example, at the site of Tel Es Sultan, also known as Jericho, Kathleen Kenyon excavated this enormous tower from the exact same period, pre-Pottery Neolithic B, but nobody remembers that because it's in archaeology textbooks. Because right now, anti-establishment narratives are what is popular. And right now, what is popular is pushing back against the scholars or the scientists or the doctors that tell people, well, this is what science shows. And that's what's becoming popular right now, is this kind of conspiracy thinking. And so I think that combined with the ignorance that people don't understand, and this is not their own fault. They've not had the opportunity to take, university level archaeology. But what it means is they don't understand the basics of our field. And so other people can jump in there and say, well, they're covering up the past. And this is where I disagree with Ed. Ed mentioned that he's grateful to people like Graham Hancock for building this audience. And I'm not at all. Because the problem is that Graham Hancock, while he builds this interest in archaeology, within the same breath, immediately poisons the well against us, who are really just trying to do our best to understand our human history.
Agreed. The question is, how will we respond? We need to separate Graham Hancock from the people who are believing what he has to say. They're misled. I want to meet these people where they're at. I want to listen to them. I want them to feel like they've been listened to. And then we can have a conversation that's reasonable and change minds. You've done a great job with it.
And I guess just to sort of wrap a ribbon around Graham Hancock, I would love to interview Graham Hancock. I don't know if any of you would love to be on this program with him in the future. If he's watching, Graham, if you're watching, this is an open invitation to the Doha Debates podcast where we can engage respectfully.
Let's do it again.
Let's do it again. It'll be good.
Absolutely.
Okay. I want to get down to the basics here. Sarah, what's it like on a dig, especially when you discover something?
So, there's a great quote from a famous archaeologist named Kent Flannery who said, "Archaeology is the most fun you can have with your pants on." I agree. I mean, otherwise, why would I be doing it after 25 years? There's a moment I had on my first excavation, which it was such a gift. It was a gift from the universe. I was working at a site about 2 hours northeast of Cairo. The site was called Mendes. And I was excavating with my wonderful Egyptian team. We work collaboratively with local people. And as we're excavating and we're digging, we discovered a handle from a beer jar from that time period. And I'm brushing it off because we categorize everything. And as I turned it over, I saw a fat thumbprint. And I was at the time 20 years old. Right, it's my first dig. It's 100 degrees out, sweltering. I don't really know what I'm doing yet. And all of a sudden, it's like I was pulled out of my body, and I had this vision of a large man throwing a pot. And I thought in that instant, who was he? Did he I had this image of him laughing. I had this image of his wife yelling at him to hurry up because the food was ready. I saw the past. It came to life before me in that moment. And then I realized that we as archaeologists don't dig for things. We are excavating human stories. And it's our job to tell those stories. And it filled me with such a sense of awe and wonder and respect. And if I'm ever having a bad day in the field, in a faculty meeting, I try to remember that moment because it was a gift. It was a gift from the universe because we're the storytellers of these people that lived long ago. And I try to never lose that sense of awe and wonder. Every moment I'm in the field, I try to live with that. And it's a responsibility. It's the weight of history that's on us. And we try to listen to the past as best we can and try to remember that people made these things, and they're our ancestors.
That gave me goosebumps. Now the rest of you have to match that. Who's going next, Ed?
Sure.
What's it like on a dig?
Oh, I love it there. I have done more survey and I'm out there. I love not being in a hole all day. I love hiking 5 miles through the jungle every day. That's the thrill for me. In my 20s, I somehow found a Maya city. And that was a big deal. The feeling that I got from doing that. And I had the benefit of a great teacher who always told me, think like a Maya, think like a Maya. Don't think like a Western person. If you're going to figure out anything about these people, you've got to put yourself in the shoes. And that's where something you said that I really liked, that we got to imagine ourselves as these people. We're in a weird, serious position that we represent these people from the past. And in my neck of the woods, there are millions of Maya people, but they don't really get to represent their ancestors. Some weird gringo like I do, like I am, does. So it's a serious charge. What I say about these people is what the world knows about them, and I take that seriously because I'm talking about someone's ancestors.
Is it because archaeologists also in the past did not take that seriously and projected their own visions of superiority on previous cultures
Well,
and civilizations?
you've hit it right on the head. That I think that there is there in the past, archaeology, which is an evolving science and field, we said a lot of racist stuff, and it is our job of this generation to try to back off of that. And it's tricky because then we're conflicting with what's been said before from our field. But going back to your question, which is how is it to be out in the field? When I found that city, I tried to think like a Maya. I sat, this was the 90s before all of the nifty phones and everything. So, I sat with topography maps and looked at this huge area we had to cover and said, if I was a Maya, where would I want to be? And I asked questions about what topography did they want? Is it sacred topography? Where's the biggest mountain? When I found that in that region, there were 2 other little mountains right next to it with 3 rivers running through it. I could see them on my map and said, if I was a Maya, that's where I'd go. It's perfect. It's got sacred topography. It's got places we need to farm. Let's go out there. And 2 seasons later, when we actually found it, wow, what an amazing experience. I had students, and I sent my students in better directions than I did. I wanted them to have this experience. But when a group of them yelled my name, I actually thought that they had been struck by a snake. So I was running across the forest with our only anti-venom kit. And I found them up on top of a 25-meter tall pyramid. And after lunch on top of that pyramid, I said, everybody spread out, and I could hear ball court, palace, another pyramid. Like, wow, what an experience. And gosh, I'll treasure it for the rest of my life. Who gets to do that? Archaeologists do.
Where is the city exactly?
On the border of Guatemala and Belize. I got to name it. I called it Monkey House. In Maya, it's Mashna, because the monkeys descended upon us the whole lunch, just yelling at us. And I said, this is their home. We're invaders. So I called it, in Maya, Mashna, Monkey House.
Beautiful. Flint?
Yeah, being on a dig it's not for everybody. I think, to me, it is the most fun you can have with your pants on, as Kent and Sarah put it. But at the same time, it is very physically and mentally challenging. I mean, there is just dirt everywhere. And by everywhere, I mean in your eyes, I mean in your butt. Like, there is just seriously dirt, sand, mud, sometimes if it's raining, everywhere. And what makes archaeology, I think, unique compared to many other academic professions is it is this combo of kind of physical work and mental work, whether you're hiking through difficult terrain or whether you're digging with a pickaxe. But at the same time, I have a different perspective than what I've heard from both Sarah and Ed, in the sense that I have discovered some really cool stuff. I have excavated, stone tools made by Neanderthals, but I've also excavated pre-dynastic tombs in Abydos and the tomb of the Griffin warrior in Greece, where there was more bronze than there was dirt. But to be honest, what I get the thrill from is not discovery. Discovery is something that happens on every archaeological project that you're on, and you get to connect with the past. But what's really thrilling to me is putting together a pattern, sort of seeing that you have all these different data points and being able to put them together and tell that story about the past from them. So one of them that I really, really like is I study the trash of ancient people. I sort of rummage through their trash, and I study it's kind of the food that they ate, right? And so they would hold these huge feasts in ancient Greece, these sacrificial feasts, and I study the butchered bones of the animals that were slaughtered and feasted upon a great asada barbecue, right? But what's really cool is if you sort of track the marks that dogs make when they gnaw on bones, is during these feasts, dogs got more treats too. So you get that connection that people had with their pets in the past, and you can only do that by counting 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 bones. I think I've gone through 250,000 from this site that I'm thinking of on Crete, the site of Azoria. And by going through them and comparing what's in their houses versus what's in their feasting deposits, I see that dogs got more treats during those feasts too. And that's just kind of cool.
Incredible. Eduardo?
Well, first time I went to the field in the Amazon, I was an undergrad. It was in 1986. So it's almost 40 years now. And I still feel the same kind of thrill. Every time I'm packing my stuff to go to the field, I still feel the same kind of thrill of getting ready to move away and spend a few weeks doing archaeological field work. My wife tells me, she's a filmmaker, she's not an academic, but she tells me that she cannot stand the smile on my face as I'm getting ready to blow away and like be gone for, and it's fun. I mean, if you were, the kind of work that I do in the Amazon, I mean, field work is amazing. Like, and there's one thing that we have to recognize, there wasn't any kind of masonry in the Amazonian Pass. So the kind of archaeology that we do, it's really organic. We work with soil samples. Sometimes we have bone remains and human remains as well, pottery. And so we try to establish some patterns of earthwork, building and stuff like that. But something which is really interesting is that we got to hang out with the people who live in the areas where we work. For instance, I was in the field last month. We're here in September 2025. I was in the field in August 2025 in the Brazilian Amazon. And, I spend my time in the field actually living in the villages of the communities where we work with. So like, bring your hammock, your mosquito net. You have to, sleep in a hammock every night and share the food and eat the food that the people eat. As many people know, the Amazon is being threatened by deforestation and violent crime today, organized crime, illegal mining. 20% of the forest cover of the Amazon basin was lost in the last 40 years. So when I started back in 1986, there was much more forest cover. Some places where I worked were covered by forests. Today they are destroyed. And that, I think that, being part of that process, for one hand, it's been really interesting because me and people from my generation of archaeologists, I think we really help to change people's perspectives about the past in the Amazon, that's something which is very exciting on one hand. But on the other hand, we really saw a big part of that area, which it's a fascinating place of the world, being destroyed by illegal logging and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's impossible for me to keep on doing the kind of archaeology that I was doing when I was doing my PhD. I'll be away for weeks in the field, no communication with the outside world, doing archaeology for the sake of archaeology. I think today we have to use this kind of information in order, to bring. You use archaeology as a political tool. So part of the field work of living together with the communities, doing, digging in their backyards or near the place where they live. Part of that has to do with also mobilizing, talking about the power of archaeology, how archaeology can be a political tool to protect their territories. And it's really amazing because, when we talk about archaeology in the Amazon, we're talking about the landscape. We're talking about the way the forest has been changed by indigenous people throughout the millennia. Some of these people are descendants from the people who did that. And they have a very sophisticated way to read the landscape. If you walk in the forest with someone who lives on these areas, people like me, we're going to be walking, seeing all these beautiful trees, but they look at it. It's like going to a library. They can identify the different species. They can talk about the connections between other animals and other plants with those species, about human beings as well. There's a very strong connection between the making of the landscapes that we know today by people in the past and in the present as well.
Eduardo raises such an important point about archaeology being political. And people for years have said, Sarah, why are you inserting politics into archaeology? Why is that a big deal? Just stick to what you're doing. And yet I have sat in congressional hearings where they're discussing whether or not archaeology gets funded. Right now in the United States, history is being erased. Museums, archaeological and cultural sites, our government is trying to rewrite our history to fit their political motivations. I mean, look at the attacks on the U.S. Capitol, January 6th. You saw Viking motifs. There, all these people online that have millions of followers on Twitter. Who are their avatars? Ancient Roman emperors. We hear Molin Labe, come and get it, right? Repeat it again and again. And I think the greatest threat that we represent to modern politics today is archaeology through its work, through collaborations with local communities, through indigenous communities. We represent the human potential where we could go by looking at the past, by honoring our ancestors, by listening to indigenous communities, we see that we have the potential to get along, to value cultural diversity. It's real convenient to imagine, a proto-civilization coming along and seeding everything, and that's who we are. No, we're part of a continuity. And indigenous groups, people today say, well, the Maya collapse, the Inca collapse, the Khmer Empire collapse. Those empires, the elite, the 1%, those systems cease to function. But those cultures, those peoples, they still exist. They still have a lot to teach us.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that archaeology has always been political. And this discussion over a lost civilization is inherently political and has been for several hundred years. The Spanish crown claimed lands in the Americas based on belief in Atlantis. Or, for example, about 200 years ago, Josiah Priest wrote a book about the mounds in North America that were built by indigenous Americans. And he claimed that there was a lost civilization that was responsible for the thousands and thousands of mounds across North America. And President Andrew Jackson, cited this lost civilization when he displaced tens of thousands of indigenous Americans on the Trail of Tears, where thousands of them died. And they used this lost civilization as justification that these people did not have claim to the lands. It takes away credit from the people that live there,
They're
from
racist.
their ancestors.
And some of them are openly racist. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're
Frank.
fine.
Yeah. If you say that they were Africans who built the pyramids, or some civilization from alien space, like Eric von Daniken's, ideas like the high civilizations of Peru. They could not. These beautiful structures could not have been made by indigenous people from South America, but some kind of alien, civilization, whatever, or like a lost civilization. In a way, you remove an agency.
Yeah,
and the remarkable sophistication of people from Africa, from Latin America, and from Asia. It's easier for some people to think that it's got to be someone from another planet than a black person from Africa did something like that, and that is very racist.
The bigotry of low expectations.
Yeah.
Can I tell you a secret? Ed told Lex Friedman that archaeology is not a science. Sorry, he's not a scientist, and it's not a science.
Well, I think archaeology is a science. It is,
of course,
but it's a social science.
There's a lot of rigor.
It's a historical science.
You
It's a
can't
social
get a grant
science.
or a permit unless you present a hypothesis to test.
Yeah.
That's the only way. You have to write into your grants and into your permit requests, I am doing this excavation or this survey or this analysis in order to test a hypothesis, which at its core is what science is about.
Okay, so Ed, why did you say it's not a science?
Well, certainly not to deny us National Science Foundation grants. I do not mean it in that regard. In my view, it's a technique through which we unearth things that we apply science to. Social science and hard science. Flint does a lot of things in the lab. Very, very scientific work. Anthropology is a social science. History is a social science. But the process of archaeology is unearthing things, in my opinion. And the reason why I say publicly that it's not science is to remind all of us that archaeology is not a repeatable experiment. Once we dig it up, that's what humanity will have for the rest of time. And I think we all need to soberly remember that it's by its nature a destructive process.
But wait a second. Yeah, I got to bite at this. Look, most sciences are not built on repeatable experiments.
Yes,
when you look at astronomy, when you look at biology, when you look at geology, most of what is discovered is the same way that archaeology goes about doing its business.
But an astronomer can say, hey, do you see that star like I see it? A geologist can say,
look,
we're looking at this bed. Can you come and repeat this experiment?
Why we record what we excavate so carefully. Multiple people can look at the isotope samples, the ratios that I get from sheep and goat teeth to look at mobility and diet. That is repeatable, those experiments.
And that's in another field of science by the time it gets there.
But all science is like this with the exception of specific laboratory experiments. Most science is actually inductive.
The core of scientific method is repeatability.
The core of scientific is hypothesis testing.
Yeah.
Archaeologists are like 12 scientists in a trench coat.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So we're like, what are we going to use today? Right. Is it going to be tests? Is it going to be, archaeological dating? Is it going to be remote sensing? We have to be trained as scientists in order to be really good archaeologists.
If you had a time machine to go back to any particular era to observe a riddle or a mystery and find out the truth, where and when would that be, Flint?
I'd go back about 100 years and warn everybody about what's going on today. Because that's going to help us uncover the truth of the past, because so much of what we know about the past is not about getting a direct glimpse of it. It's about how many resources we put into studying it. And so if we could go back 100 years and warn people about climate change, about World War II, about the implications of what they're doing at that time that impact us today in the 21st century, hopefully that would change. I mean, so much of what we're worried about today is the future.
Time machine, Eduardo.
I'll need a time machine and an airplane also, because I love to go back like, somewhere around AD 500 and just fly across the world, because there's so many changes happening in Europe, here in the Americas, in the Maya world, here in South America, the first states, the largest sites in the Amazon. So I would love to, I think I'll do it for fun. Just It's good to warn people, but if I had a time machine and an airplane and an interpreter, I'd love to hang out, in the world for 100 years, maybe around AD 500. I think it would be an interesting time to see those changes happening, and I'd love to, to be there, part of that somehow.
Sarah?
I'm biased. I mean, for purely selfish reasons, I would go back to ancient Egypt about 1800 BC to see the Middle Kingdom enlished. There's this trope of the missing city in archaeology, right? Cities are never fully gone, fully missing. Lisht was Egypt's capital in the Middle Kingdom, and it is actually a missing city. It is somewhere beneath the Nile, although we've done some coring work and we think we have a pretty good idea of where it is. But to me, the Middle Kingdom of Egypt is representative of sort of human potential, of where we could be as a world. End of the Old Kingdom, there's great climate change, internal strife, social, political, economic issues. But it's mainly climate change that causes the end of Egypt's Great Pyramid Age. And for 150 or so years, Egypt is fighting, and then it emerges anew. And it's this great renaissance. It's this period of art and architecture and literature. Most of the stories that we translate when we learn Middle Egyptian in university and in grad school come from this time period in Egypt, and were probably written at Lisht.
Ed's had a few minutes to think about his time machine.
My answer has not changed, though I am jealous of you guys that work in the desert with all of your preservation. Me and Eduardo got nothing but goo to work with.
Oh, I mean, a quick point of clarification. Why is the desert better than elsewhere?
The state of preservation.
Okay.
Things, it does not sit in a rainforest environment. I mean, I'm convinced that most of the best things that the Maya made are now goo, because they're made out of perishable materials. We've got great with things in stone, but wow, I have been part of digs where we have found books, and they are just piles of goo and pigment. And gosh, I wish I knew I had a nice little papyrus where we could actually read what that was. We have 4 Maya books. This somewhat relates to what I'd do with my time machine. I would go back about 600 years to Cusco and ask to be the student of a Quipu Kumayak, who are the people who read the quipus. That was their written system of communication, and we do not know how to read it. I wish the Spanish had spent more time with this. We have over 1,000 quipus left, and we can find more, but we have no Rosetta Stone. We do not know what they say. There's about 2/3 of them follow the rules of math, and they seem related to accounting. But there's the other 1/3 that does not follow the rules of math, and they're probably writing. And I would love to be able to read those things. And if I could just be the student of one of these Quipu Kumayaks, I could come back with a methodology to crack that code.
Can I change my answer about the time machine?
Sure, go for it.
I'd like to go back 12,000 years ago and prove that Atlantis existed. I think that if I have a plane like Eduardo could have, I could fly over everywhere. And if I could prove Atlantis existed, my book that I'm writing right now would sell much better.
Didn't Indiana Jones already do that?
You've got the hat. So
I got the hat.
That's true.
Oh, man. I'm fascinated by your work, and I'm looking forward to following your careers and seeing the work that you unearth over the coming years. Thank you so much. It's been a privilege and an honor to talk to all of you, and an education to learn from all of you. Ed Barnhart, Sarah Parcak, Eduardo Neves, and Flint Dibble, thank you very much for joining us on the Doha Debates podcast.